Good evening. I'm Andrea Chase, and I chair the Energy Sustainability Committee here in Longmeadow. And I want to thank you for being here in person. We have people on Zoom who will be joining us, and we're also recording this for LCTV so we can see this presentation on a regular basis. So I want to thank you for being here. First of all, we're delighted to host this opportunity for the town to learn about the specialized opt-in building code. As you may know, Longmeadow is a green community, and because of this, we already adhere to an enhanced building code called the stretch code. This presentation tonight will discuss the differences between the stretch code currently in effect here and this upgrade, the specialized opt-in code. The purpose of the specialized one, which was developed by the state's Department of Energy Resources, is that it allows municipalities to adopt stricter energy and emission standards for new construction to align with the state's 2050 net zero emissions goal. The purpose of this is to promote high-performance buildings by increasing energy efficiency, requiring the integration of renewable energy sources like solar, and mandating pre-wiring for future electrification to reduce greenhouse gas emissions in new residential and commercial buildings. As I should also point out that the Williams School building project has already agreed to adhere to the upgraded stretch code provisions. The purpose of this evening's presentation is to answer questions you may have about the impact of this on our town, whether its requirements, its benefits, its costs. And as I said, this evening's workshop is being recorded. I'm delighted, by the way, that we have as a presenter Mike Rossi. He's a program manager with PSD and provides energy code training and technical support to building professionals across the Northeast. Michael is a ResNet certified PERS rater, and he's going to introduce you to what all of these acronyms mean, as he's going to tell us what the definitions are.
Yep.
An IECC residential plans examiner, and he serves on the board of the Northeast Home Energy Rating System Alliance. And he's also chair of the Energy Code Committee. Michael has a Master's of Science degree in Sustainability Science with a concentration in renewable energy and efficient design from the University of Massachusetts in Amherst. He's previously worked as a senior associate of the Building Energy Codes at the Northeast Energy Efficiency Partnership and as a HERS rater at Advanced Building Analysis in Massachusetts. So at this point, I'd like to turn it over to Mike and thank him for making the trek to Longmeadow.
Yeah, thank you so much, Andrea. So for the purposes of this presentation, I'm actually going to pass it off to my colleague, Mark Urbanski, who's printed on the Zoom, to present the first few slides, and then I'll get into the more in-depth technical content. So, Mark, take it away.
Thank you very much. I'm Mark Urbanski. I'm the Deputy Director of the Green Communities Program. I'm also the former Western Regional Coordinator. The only person I can see in the room is Michael, so hi everybody in the room. I think when I actually started as the Western Regional Coordinator, I think my first day here I received an email from Andrea welcoming me and asking me to come and join them for a presentation. So my time in Longmeadow dates back pretty far. Chris Mason was going to give the presentation today, but he's not feeling well, so I'm going to step in for him. Are the slides up on the screen right now?
Yes, sir.
Okay, great. So the first slide should say today's presentation. Okay. So today's presentation, I'm just going to give you a little bit of a policy background on why all of this. Why we're hoping for all of this to be adopted, an overview of the Climate Leaders Program, and Mike will give you in-depth talk about the specialized stretch code. Next slide. So in 2008, Massachusetts had the Global Warming Solutions Act, and that set emissions standards. And that same year, we also signed the Green Communities Act, which really, the Green Communities Act was signed, and it kind of restructured some of how we deal with energy, and it created the Green Communities Program, which is great. In 2021, there were some updates to this where greenhouse gas emissions limits were created for Massachusetts, and with a net zero emissions by 2050. And that established an emissions limit of no less than 50% for 2030, and no less than 75% for 2040. So the way that the state is hoping to achieve these goals overall is to electrify buildings. It's an important part. Electrify our vehicles, clean up the grid, and then the remainder would be through carbon sequestration. Skip some. Oh, that's fine. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the Climate Leaders Program. One of the benefits of adopting the specialized stretch code, which is part of the Climate Leaders Program, one of the criteria they have to achieve to become climate leaders, is you'll be able to apply for a technical assistance grant, and the technical assistance grant is pretty significant. It's up to $150,000, and that technical assistance grant will go towards further defining projects that are defined in your decarbonization plan or your roadmap. And you can also apply for an accelerator grant as part of that as well. And the accelerator grant is also significant. It's up to $1 million. And one of the things that's funded through the accelerator grant is on-site solar PV, it could be solar thermal, heat pumps, energy storage, and other decarbonization activities. And so this is all part of if the community becomes a climate leader. We accept the applications for the Climate Leaders Program semi-annually. We just had a deadline in August, and the next deadline will be in February of next year, and then again in August. So the requirements for climate leader certification is you must be a green community in good standing, and Longmeadow is a green community in good standing. Must establish and maintain a local committee, and I know well that Longmeadow has a local committee to advise, coordinate, and lead some efforts and climate activities within the community. Another requirement for certification is that you have to commit to municipal decarbonization by 2050 and formulate a roadmap for implementation. So the commitment, and taking a step back, there's guidance documents on our website explaining all of these in more detail. But the decarbonization commitment would be something that would be voted on there's guidance documents about it too that can say what the commitment can be. And then the roadmap, you can apply for assistance for the roadmap to implement these activities. And the roadmap assistance can be applied for online, and DOER will assign a vendor to you to work with you to help you develop that roadmap. And then once that roadmap's been created, you can then apply for the grants that can implement those activities. Another piece is the zero emission vehicle first policy. So as part of being a green community, Longmeadow has a fuel efficient vehicle policy, but this would be kind of a step above that, which would be a zero emission vehicle policy. So it's looking at the vehicles, if there is a zero emission vehicle, like an electric vehicle available, that would be the vehicle that you would be purchasing first. If there's no vehicle available for that class of vehicle, then you would look at possibly plug-in hybrids or hybrids. And then if those aren't available, then you can buy the most fuel efficient vehicle out there. Once again, there's sample policies out there and guidance on the website. And then the last thing that would have to be required for certification is the specialized stretch code adoption, which we'll talk a little bit more. We'll talk about in more detail. Okay. We're looking for a zero over time approach for your municipal buildings. So, and that's where you could apply for assistance for a vendor to come in and help you with this. And the zero over time approach is really looking at triggering events. We want to have a layout of where all of the HVAC equipment might be within the community. We're only talking about municipal operations here. Where the end of life might be, because if something has an end of life that's coming up, we want to think about that piece of equipment to switch over to electrify and get it off fossil fuels. Getting off fossil fuels and switching over to electrifying them is really the main goal behind this. Looking at building renovations, when you might be replacing your roof. Replacing the roof is a really big part of potential decarbonization, because you can add insulation to it to reduce the energy demand on it, and then also update the roof to be able to handle the load of solar panels in the future as well. And then another part of that decarbonization roadmap will be what buildings you have to replace. Some buildings might not just be the end of their useful life for HVAC equipment, they might be the end of their useful life for the building itself, and looking at building those new buildings to help reduce the energy demand. I mentioned the zero emission first policy. The first one is battery electric vehicles, plug-in hybrids, hybrid electric vehicles, and then the most fuel efficient vehicle. Yeah.
All right, Mark, I can take the presentation from here. So, hi everyone again. Thank you so much for having us. So, as Andrea mentioned, my name is Michael Rossi, and I'm an energy code specialist and program manager with Performance Systems Development, also known as PSD. So, we're here today both supporting MassSave as, supporting the Department of Energy Resources as a technical support for this. I also provide training and technical support for the MassSave program. So as part of this, we offer, we're part of the Codes and Standards Compliance and Support Initiative through MassSave. So we offer trainings, monthly webinars, a hotline where you can call if you have any energy code related questions, and things like that. So we're happy to be here today to talk about the opt-in specialized energy code. And so I just want to note first that the way I like to describe the code, so the official title is the Municipal Opt-in Specialized Code, but because of that, there's, I might be referring to it differently throughout the course of the presentation. And just note I'm using a lot of these terms interchangeably, so if I call it the opt-in code or the specialized code, those acronyms sort of still mean what's going to be the focus of discussion today. So great, so just to give a little bit of a lay of the land of the energy code structure in Massachusetts is that there's 3 available codes for adoption in Massachusetts. There is the base code, the stretch code, and the specialized code. So each of these codes is based on a national model code, which is the 2021 version of the International Energy Conservation Code. And so each of the provisions of the code sort of go beyond. So Longmeadow is currently following the stretch code. And what that is a version of the 21 IECC, which is that national model code, with some amendments that are exclusive to Massachusetts. So Massachusetts adds to that national model code things that give it the unique state flavor, is how I like to describe it. So as I said, Longmeadow is currently a stretch code. And there are provisions in the stretch code for both new construction as well as major renovations and additions. And across Massachusetts, there's about 246 municipalities that are on the stretch code. So the stretch code is actually one of the prerequisites to becoming a green community. And as Mark mentioned earlier, adopting the specialized code is actually a prerequisite to becoming a climate leader community. And so the way the specialized code is structured is that it only focuses on new construction. So the only buildings impacted by the additional provisions are those for new construction. And currently in Massachusetts, 55 communities have adopted the specialized code. And the way that this slide's laid out is it's sort of a pyramid, and that's how I like to describe the structure of the code layout, because it sort of builds on each other, right? So the stretch code has base code provisions plus additional measures that go beyond the base code. And the specialized code has stretch code provisions, but additional things that go beyond the stretch code. So that's sort of how we have this pyramid shape here. And the sort of groups in charge of the codes are also a little bit different as well. So the base code is actually based on 780 CMR, which is the 10th edition of the Massachusetts State Building Code, whereas the stretch code and the specialized code are actually found under the regulation of the Department of Energy Resources under 225 CMR 22 and 23 for residential and commercial provisions. A little bit of a jargon, so I apologize for that. So this slide right here really gets into detail about which code is adopted in which community. So those with that yellowish color here are communities that have adopted the base code and are still following the base code. The communities in that light blue color are communities that are currently on the stretch code. And then that other color, which is the dark blue with that green border around it, those are currently communities in the state that have adopted the specialized stretch code in Massachusetts. So as we said, 50 communities are on the base code, 246 are on the stretch code, and 55 are on the specialized code. Great, so throughout this presentation I might be using a few terms that do tend to be relatively technical jargon for the industry. So I'm just going to break down sort of what these terms are in a little bit more detail before we get into the presentation. So the first is the definition of HERS. So HERS refers to a standard called Home Energy Rating System. So it's a standardized scoring system that measures a home's energy efficiency. So the way I like to describe the HERS index is essentially a miles per gallon sticker for your car, but for your house. So that's really a way to think about that index. And it sort of looks at the energy use of a project before factoring in occupant behavior. The other term I'm going to be using throughout is passive house. So passive house is actually a third-party certification system similar to a HERS. So HERS is a third-party system and passive house is a third-party system where someone would go into the project and inspect and rate the project to see if it meets these specific design features. And so the requirements for passive house essentially go way beyond typical and traditional code requirements. And so what that involves is a very airtight thermal envelope, so a lot of insulation used in the project, really good moisture management strategies through the use of a balanced ventilation system like an ERV or an HRV. And then, again, a little bit more technical there, but the way those systems work is they bring fresh air into the house while also simultaneously exhausting stale air. And the Massachusetts Stretch Code has a requirement for ERVs and HRVs. But passive house, as I said, very airtight, very good indoor air quality because of that, very low energy load. So you're not going to see many utility bills in a passive house project because typically they tend to produce either more energy than they produce or have very low heating or cooling loads. So another term I might be using is ASHRAE. So what that refers to is the American Society of Heating, Refrigerating, and Air Conditioning Engineers. It's an acronym for that. So on the commercial side of the energy code, there's a standard called ASHRAE 90.1. And essentially it's a technical standard that is baked into some of the provisions for commercial energy there. So if I refer to ASHRAE in the presentation, it specifically refers to that standard 90.1. So when I say mixed fuel, that is essentially defined as like a building that contains combustion equipment or includes piping for the equipment. So combustion equipment is essentially liquid fuel, solid fuel, and fuel gas. So fossil fuels you might think of, like natural gas or propane that you might see in construction practices. If you are using them for space heating, water heating, cooking, or clothes drying, if you're using natural gas or propane or another fuel for any of those things, that would be considered a mixed fuel building, or if there's piping for that equipment. Now another term I'll be using is TEDI, also known as a thermal energy demand intensity. And again, this gets into really technical code revision, so we're not going to cover it too much, but the way I like to describe it, it's one of 5 optional compliance paths when using the commercial energy code. So the way TEDI is defined is the total annual energy delivered to or removed from a building for space conditioning and conditioning of ventilation air, normalized by area. So essentially, it's the amount of energy either taken out of the space with a cooling system or brought into the space with a heating system for that. And essentially, as I said, it's just a way to measure the energy load of the building. So again, these are just some technical terms to go over. I'm not going to cover them in too much detail, but just if you hear them, that's sort of what these are referring to. Great. So first, we mentioned the term HERS. So what this just gets into a little bit of detail about what a HERS rating actually is. And to preface this, I want to say that HERS ratings are required in the stretch code that you guys that's already adopted in Longmeadow. And there's no change to the requirement for the HERS index right now between the stretch code and the specialized code. So the HERS score that's required by code is the same between that. So there's no significant difference between the two. So a little bit about HERS is that the process works where a HERS rater who's certified through a standard called the Residential Energy Services Network, or ResNet, they go through a certification process, and that lets them do these energy ratings on the buildings. So the first thing, they typically work for a builder or contractor or owner of a building who is looking to get a rating done on their property. So the person who's working in the project will give the plan set to the HERS rater, and they'll use that plan set along with design features that the builder gives them to essentially say, here's the projected energy use of the project based on the features that you've given me. So what's the square footage of the plans, and any things like what they're using for the heating system, cooling system, different things like that get given to the rater at that thing. And they produce a preliminary HERS score, which essentially says the HERS score used in this project is better than the one required by code to get, and essentially that preliminary certification is used to get a building permit to start the project. During the process of when the home is being built, the HERS rater actually goes to the site for a second part of the inspection called a midpoint inspection, where they, and that's essentially after insulation is installed but before drywall is installed, to look to see how effectively they're air sealing the building, making sure that everything is designed effectively and things like that. And so they'll do that insulation inspection at that point in the process. Sometimes they test the duct system as well to see out if there's any air leakage in the ducts at that phase, or at this final inspection. So the final inspection happens basically like a week or so before the final certificate of occupancy of the project. They just test the building just to 4 different features, like they measure the air tightness of the building with a blower door test, which essentially is a tarp, like you can see in this image here, that has a fan attached to it, and the fan essentially sucks all of the air out of the building and depressurizes it to a certain pressure. And then what you do is at that specific pressure, you measure the flow, which is typically a measurement in cubic feet per minute. And that flow measurement here actually is what you use to describe, and that actually goes into the HERS report. So you say the air leakage of the project is measured to be 2,500 CFM, and that CFM value goes into the modeling software for a HERS rating. And then so other pieces here, so during that final inspection, they test things like the ventilation system, making sure there's proper flow there, how airtight the home is, and just taking into consideration other things, and they verify all of the design features of the project to give a final HERS certificate, which provides, which you give to the local code official so that they can sign off on the certificate of occupancy. And that final certificate really goes to show all of the design features of the project, showing that it's all been verified on site by the rater earlier in the process, showing that it passes the code. So I might have gone into too much detail about that for the purpose of today's presentation, but it does give a little bit of background in terms of what we're getting into more in the following slides. So this is an example of how the HERS index has evolved over time in Massachusetts. So I want to note that the lower the HERS score, the more efficient the design. And so a HERS 100 is essentially equivalent to a new home that was constructed in 2006. And so the lower the score, the more efficient. And a net zero home, or a home that produces more energy than it consumes, is a HERS 0 or lower. So you can actually go lower in the score under 0. So as you can see over time, the required HERS index actually differed a little bit between the base code and the stretch code and the specialized code. But as you can see right now in 2024 and 2025, the requirements for the base code are a HERS 52, and the requirements for both the stretch code and the specialized code are a 42. So essentially there's no change in the requirement for new construction's HERS rating, or any HERS index for that matter, between the old code and the new code you're looking to adopt. So those are specifically the same thing. So just to give a breakdown here, and essentially the point of this slide is to sort of compare the differences between the codes, looking at some of these specific features. So when you're looking at an all-electric new home, the good news is there's actually no change in the requirements for the specialized code that go beyond what you already have to do for the stretch code. So the stretch code has requirements, and the specialized code, there's nothing more you have to do that's more stringent than what's in the stretch code. So that's just something to note there. So the requirement for an all-electric new home is you have to have a HERS 45 or otherwise comply via Passive House, which, as I said, is the other third-party certification process that you can do. And as I said, same requirements as the stretch code, nothing new. Now, the only situation where there is going to be more stringent requirements is, again, for new homes built with fossil fuels. So if you are considered a mixed fuel building, you are required to include, in addition to a HERS rating, both a solar PV system, so on-site solar photovoltaic system, as well as wiring the property for future electrification. So what that means is that any equipment that you're currently using for space heating, water heating, cooking, and clothes drying essentially has to have an outlet nearby that equipment, so that if in the future someone wants to install an electric system that currently has a gas system, you can essentially plug and play. So you can just plug in the system and doing that. Now, one of the benefits of having this available at this point in the construction process is that it allows for the avoiding potential costly future retrofits. So if you're looking to retrofit your home 10 years down the line, you want to switch your current gas stove to an induction stove, you can do that. You don't have to pay to have to poke holes in your walls and go through that costly process, because the outlet's already there to convert from one system to the other. So pre-wiring, I like to describe it as like consumer protection in a way, because by doing it when a project's new and you have new construction, it's easier to do than later down the line. Additionally, the requirement of solar and how much you have to actually put in the property does depend. So typically projects that are over 4,000 square feet, which I like to describe as like larger luxury homes, actually have a more stringent requirement. So they have to use enough solar on the project to get to net zero if they're using fossil fuels. So if you have a project that's over 4,000 square feet, large luxury home, using fossil fuels, it has to be a HERS 0 or better. And then additionally, it also has to be wired for that future electrification. So as I mentioned, Passive House can be used for any pathway, so even if it's all electric or mixed fuel. And the only additional requirement for Passive House buildings is just to have that wiring, pre-wiring for future electrification there. When it comes to additions and alterations to existing homes, the requirements are the exact same as they are under the stretch code. There's nothing new you have to do that goes beyond the current requirements of the stretch code for historic homes, for existing homes, and also for historic homes. So essentially, historic homes can actually be exempt from the energy code if there is potential threat to the form, fabric, or function of the building. So energy code provisions, if for whatever reason it threatens the historic nature of the building, they can be exempt from those requirements. So that's just a little bit of background in terms of the residential side of the stretch code. and the specific requirements for that. So as I said, only impacts new construction, only impacts new construction using fossil fuels, and all electric new homes are the same as they would be under the stretch code. Great, so when we talk about the specific solar requirements for residential buildings, this slide sort of lays it out in a little bit more detail. So as I said, the solar is only required for mixed fuel buildings where there's a suitable solar roof zone that's more than 300 square feet and has the right orientation. Because the big thing is you want to make sure you're putting solar on a location that makes sense. And there are exceptions to the requirements where if the site is shaded for more than 70% of the year, then it's exempt from the energy code. So if the site's shaded for more than 70% of daylight hours annually, is sort of the way the code says it, you don't have to install a solar system. The system can be ground mounted as long as it's on site, and there is direct ownership or third-party lease allowed for that. And big thing that people might bring up as a concern is cutting down trees, but no trees need to be cut down, because as I mentioned, there is that shading exemption available when it's shaded that way. The other big piece of it is you think about the roof orientation, right? There's some orientations that the sun hits all year round, whereas other ways the house is oriented might not maximize the solar there. So what you have to do, in the way the code's structured, is that there is an exemption if you're not in that orientation that is required by the code there. So, as I said, this is a requirement only for mixed fuel new construction. So, mixed fuel new construction under 4,000 square feet has to have a 4 kilowatt solar array, and mixed fuel new construction over 4,000 square feet has to have enough solar to get to a zero or better. And as I said before, all electric projects that are new don't require any solar PV on the site. All right, so one thing I want to highlight in this slide here is actually some of the really great incentives available to help subsidize some of the costs of this new construction when you have to follow the requirements of this specialized code. So first of all, we have the base tier incentive from Mass Save. And so that incentive is actually $7,500 for having an all-electric heating, water heating, cooking, and clothes drying. So the base tier incentive for Mass Save, there are program requirements you have to hit. If you meet all those program requirements, you qualify for that base tier. Now, Mass Save also offers opportunities to go above and beyond the requirements of the base tier, one of which options is the Energy Star Next Gen certification. So that actually increases the incentive available from $7,500 to $15,000. And if you want to go beyond that, there's also an option for passive house. So if you're building a new passive house, that can be a $25,000 incentive for the project. Additionally, Mass Save also offers some adders for certain technologies that are improve the building. So some of those include like a Wi-Fi connected thermostat, induction stoves, heat pump water heaters, getting certified to an Energy Star standard, or the Department of Energy Zero Energy Homes Program certification using a ground source heat pump. So the way it's structured is they're called market transformation adders. So they're incentives that are available when you do these new technologies that are entering the market to help offset some of the additional costs that might come from doing so. Additionally, there are some federal incentives available through the 45L tax credit program. But because of the current administration shift, some of these programs are expiring soon. So they're going to expire on June 30th, 2026. But as of now, under the 45L tax credit, if you're certified to Energy Star, that's $2,500 available for a project if you have that certification, as well as $5,000 available if it's a zero energy ready home defined by the U.S. Department of Energy. Other incentives that are available there is also a federal solar tax credit that expires at the end of the year that provides 30% of the fee of the system. So 30% federal tax credits available for the solar system, along with a 15% state tax credit with a $1,000 cap there. There's some net metering available, so if you produce more energy than you're consuming, you can sell that energy back to the grid and make some money on that. There's the Massachusetts Smart Program, and there are no sales tax or extra property tax on added value to the home. So As I said, some significant money out there to help offset some of the potential cost increases that might come from a specialized code building. So great, so now we're going to get into a little bit of detail on some of the cost slides to meet the code. And this is again, to go from the stretch code to the specialized code. So in this first example, we have a small single family all electric project. Now as you can see here, there's no cost difference. And the reason why is because there's nothing added you have to do between the code versions. So since there's nothing new, there's really no cost associated with making this change. Now we're looking at a small single family gas scenario. So that's a building that's under 4,000 square feet using gas. Now when it comes to the costs that are added as part of the project, we're thinking about a 4,000 or so total cost for pre-wiring, as well as a $14,900 solar tax credit. And so with that, there are some incentives available to help offset some of that solar cost that I noted here. So that's that 5,470 value. So essentially the total added cost of moving from the stretch code to the specialized code for a small mixed fuel building is noted in that bottom column there. So that 13,446 value. But you also get annual energy savings on the second column, which is 1,482. So that's just a quick breakdown of some of the potential added costs from moving from one code to the other. And I want to note that the pre-wiring costs don't actually include the cost of the panel upgrade. It's just the wiring for the system. All right, so now we're going to talk a little bit about the requirements for commercial buildings. So I know that it sounds like you guys are building a new school, or there's something going on with a new school in Longmeadow. So just to note that schools, offices, or other municipal buildings, the requirements under the stretch code are the same. So the requirements don't change from the stretch code to the specialized code for all electric projects. But for mixed fuel projects like those, again, schools, offices, and municipal buildings, they have to follow that TEDI path I talked about, which is that energy or thermal energy demand intensity threshold that has to be met, or passive house. But if you're following the specialized code, very similar to the residential provisions, but for the commercial provisions, there's a requirement for solar PV on site, as well as wiring for future electrification as well, for a new mixed fuel building that is built under the specialized code. And then another note is that other commercial buildings that are over 20,000 square feet that are typically known as like highly ventilated buildings, they would follow either that ASHRAE 90.1 standard or TEDI or passive house as the available compliance paths. But in each of those instances, they're also required for the solar, added solar, as well as the wiring for future electrification. One other piece here is they actually have additional requirements for the minimum efficiency of the equipment you're using in the project for HVAC systems. So they do set a minimum efficiency just to help promote some of the higher level commercial standards there. Next slide, please. And then going to the requirements for multifamily. So I'm not sure how many new multifamily buildings have been built in Longmeadow, but just for reference, under the stretch code, there are different options for compliance for multifamily buildings that are over 12,000 square feet. Under the stretch code, you can use either the HERS path, the TEDI path, or passive house. But in the specialized code, passive house is actually required. So that's typically because these types of projects tend to favor the occupants of the building. So there'll be very low energy burden for those that are in the building. They'll have very low operating costs. It'll be really good indoor air quality, very comfortable to live in. So passive house is required under the specialized code for multifamily projects over 12,000 square feet. And then, as I said, there are some really great incentives available from Mass Save as it pertains to both building to this stretch code, as well as these passive house incentives noted here. So passive house incentives can be pretty significant as well. So to do a feasibility study for a project, which includes energy modeling and pre-certification, there's incentives of up to 100% of the cost for the feasibility study, 75% for the energy modeling, and $750 per unit for the pre-certification. So as I said, that adds to $5,000 for feasibility, $500 per unit up to $20,000 for the energy modeling, and no cap on the pre-certification amount there. Additionally, if you do get that final certification under Passive House, which is required by code, $3,000 is available per unit. So when you're building these bigger multifamily buildings like that, there are some really significant incentives that do help offset some of that cost of building to that higher standard. And then additionally, similarly, there is that 45L tax credit program that's expiring in June of 2026 that does provide additional incentives for the Energy Star as well as DOE zero energy homes. I can't read what's in the green there, but I think that's something we want to highlight as well. So Passive House apartments are awarded 8 points for the low-income housing tax credit applications as well. So that's one of the benefits as well. You do get points for building to a Passive House standard. And they require that the, so Passive House certifications require projects that are eligible for Energy Star or zero energy homes to get certifications, making it easier to apply for the federal tax credit. So that's just note on some of the multifamily incentives available. All right, so now we're going to talk about some FAQs about the specialized code. There's a lot of misinformation, I'd say, out there on what the code actually implies. So we're just here to dispel some of these rumors. So first question is, does the opt-in specialized code apply to existing buildings? As I've noted throughout the presentation, no. They only impact new construction, and the requirements for existing buildings have to follow Chapter 5 like they do under the stretch code. So nothing new you have to do for the specialized code for those existing buildings. Will the opt-in specialized code discourage the creation of affordable housing? No. As we talked about with that incentive slide, there are some really great incentives available to help offset the costs, and a majority of the projects built Passive House nowadays are actually affordable housing, and that number is growing across the state. Is it possible to install gas cooktop? Yes. So you can still use gas, you can still use fossil fuel across the project, but the only thing is it does have to follow that mixed fuel path, which means that if you're using gas for space heating, water heating, cooking, or clothes drying, you have to also pre-wire and add that 4 kilowatt solar array. And then just, some people ask, why should you adopt a specialized code? So I'd say the number one reason is the pre-wiring, which again, avoid those costly retrofits down the line if you're building a new home that doesn't have to undergo those future costs by doing it up front. So again, it's easier to wire for future electrification when the walls are open rather than 5-10 years down the line when the technology in the market shifts and you have to sort of meet that technology. So that's one of the really big benefits of it. And then the last question is, will the specialized code affect the cost of building a new home? So it will not affect the cost of building a new all-electric home. Because as I said, the requirements are the same as they would be under the stretch code, so there's nothing there. For new homes built with fossil fuels, it'll add the cost of pre-wiring for future electrification, for any appliance that burns fossil fuels, as well as the cost of investing in a solar system if the solar system would not be exempt from those exceptions that we talked about earlier, specifically around adequate space in the roof for the system, shading requirements, so if it's not shaded for more than 70% of the time, and proper roof orientation as well. All right, so here's just some information and resources that are available that can provide more information about the specialized code. But I think with that, I'll pass it over to the audience for any questions we might have. Yes.
So you have to speak loud enough for the owl for
Yes.
Zoom, and you have to use the microphone for the video recording. Sorry.
Is this presentation available online somewhere?
Yes, we will circulate the slides to attendees after the presentation. I know Chris and Mark have it, so we can just make sure the committee has it so they can circulate to folks. You can share it publicly if that's helpful.
Thanks. Question on the solar exemption.
Yeah.
Who is making that final decision? Is that the building inspector? And are they using some sort of documentation provided by the builder?
Yeah, so typically the builder or architect for the project will sort of show evidence to the code official that the project might be exempt. So typically with like architectural plans and things like that, they'll have a note on the orientation and they'll say, hey, the roof is oriented this way. The way I'd say it is just like a documentation by the architect provided to the building official showing evidence that the site would meet those exemptions.
Thank you.
Hi, thanks for being here.
Yeah.
I have a lot of questions, but one of the things that came up that I'm sure has come up before, so just so I understand, so if you build a new house in our town and you have, it's mixed use, including just a gas cooktop, then you're going to be required to basically have the solar array.
Yes, that's correct.
A question about those small residential incentives that you had, are those phased out at a certain income level? You put up that slide with all the
Yeah, so
credits and.
right now,
stuff.
I can't speak specifically to those, but I know that there are different incentives available for different incomes, and I think low income does provide more potential incentives on top of that. But those are essentially the residential new construction incentives from Mass Save for a new construction project. I think there are additional.
Right, so usually if you're a family that's like, if you have a certain level of income, some of those incentives sometimes go away, you're not aware of any of those.
So not in this instance, because again, it's really focused on new construction. So when it comes to those specific types of concerns and stuff, I think that is mainly more around like rebates for this kind of stuff, whereas this is mainly focused on the costs of potentially offsetting the building a new home in this situation.
Early on when you were talking about being a climate leader and you were talking about grants, I assume that's just for town buildings? Grants that the town can apply for? Or-
The municipalities would apply
Right.
for that.
So only for town
To
buildings?
to support projects in their decarbonization plan.
What was on an early slide, it said clean up the grid was one of the strategies. I didn't know, I just out of curiosity, didn't know what that meant. One of the first slides, it said, hey, we can do, these are strategies we can use, and one of them was clean up the grid. What did that mean?
So that was that was our plan for why we want to electrify buildings. We want to electrify buildings and vehicles, and by electrifying those items, or those things that we would, as we clean up the grid, we then aren't using any fossil fuels. But
Oh,
if
make
we-
the grid clean, like clean energy.
Oh, yeah.
I didn't understand, okay.
Sorry. Yeah.
And carbon sequestration was on there. Is that happening at all in our state, generally? Are
No,
we
that-
pulling
that's it.
carbon out of the air, or
That
carbon
was-
out of power plants,
That was one of the
smoke
strategies at
stacks?
the end, we're not able to achieve.
We're not doing that now, right? Was there any thought, so this is, I don't want to hog the mic, but I'll ask one more question, and then others will ask, but was there any thought to making this kind of more of an incentive-based rather than a requirement type of program? Like, could we, motivate people more to put solar arrays? I mean, I'm sure this program has been in place for years, obviously, but I wonder sometimes if the reason why only 50-some towns out of 350 towns are doing it is because they're concerned about the requirements they're imposing on people and worried that like it will deter people from either new construction or impose an unnecessary, like a too onerous a burden.
Yeah, so I can speak to that a little bit. So the stretch code has actually been available in the state since 2008. So because of that, that's really why a majority of the communities are on that. Whereas the specialized code actually first became available for adoption in January of 2023. So it's only
quite
been
new.
quite new, yes. So a lot of the communities that have adopted the specialized code thus far are considered early adopters.
Is that, there's only 50 communities in the state that are still on the base code.
Right.
Most of them have adopted some sort of greater code than what the base code is. You said, I think you said, can this be kind of an incentive program? It is. We're not requiring communities to adopt the specialized code or the stretch code. I think the fact that, only 50 of our 351 communities haven't actually made that leap to adopt stretch or specialized shows that a lot of communities are interested in putting these new building standards into place.
Thank you. Can you comment a bit on the experience of towns that have adopted it? Has there been any issues or problems with people, when they want to build new construction, they've had a lot of complaints, or has there been any trouble with enforcement in the last 2 years since it's been in existence?
Yeah, so I think speaking to the specialized code, I don't know if there's as many examples of that out there, but speaking to the stretch code, there have been concerns around enforcement early on, but DOER actually updated their stretch code in February of 2025 to reflect some of stakeholder feedback when it comes to some of those specific enforcement challenges. So what they did was actually take into consideration some of the concerns leveraged early on, back when the code was first available in 2023, took those into consideration and came up with an updated version of the code in February that alleviated a lot of those construction concerns for the stretch code that had been there from the initial part of the rollout. So yeah, that's just an example of like how the code is a little bit flexible and can change over time. And actually some of the provisions it did in the new February update was make them a little bit less stringent than they were before, because this sort of went too far in the other direction, where some of the requests from those, and again, this is just from me being on the ground work with a lot of code officials, things like that, concerns around the requirements in the stretch code for existing buildings. But because that's been really the main pain point of the code that I've identified, I don't see as many concerns around specialized code adoption. But I don't know if Mark or you want to speak to that anymore.
No, that was a great answer, Mike. You know, the code doesn't stay static. It updates, I think, every 3 years. So whenever there are large changes in the code, there is a little bit of a learning curve. We offer education to building code officials to assist with that. There was a lot of education, you know, as the specialized code rolled out, as the stretch code got updated. But you know, I think it's been going well right now. But you know, there's always anecdotal evidence of somebody maybe not fully understanding the code. But that's why we exist. That's why Mike's here too, to help kind of demystify that. And that's why there are frequently asked questions or myths out there that we want to kind of bust as well.
Okay, I have just a couple of questions here. Longmeadow, I think, is like 95 to 100% built out. We don't have any room for any new lots that I know of, at least. Are any of these incentives available for what you call the costly retrofits for the existing housing stock? Most of our houses, I'm going to say, we have some historic houses along Longmeadow Street, but, you know, post-World War II, 50s, 60s, 70s, we have a lot of those houses in our community.
Yeah, I can speak to that. So MassSave does offer a renovations and additions program as well. That does provide additional incentives for existing building projects that are undergoing either a renovation or addition. ICF is the organization that really handles a lot of those types of questions and stuff. So I'd contact someone from ICF to try to see if a specific project would fall under the requirements of that program, or seeing if there's any other available incentives if the threshold of construction for that project doesn't exceed a certain size. So yeah, and the thing is I want to note is that some of these incentive structures are actually changing relatively soon as well. So I don't want to speak to anything specific in terms of what's available, but there is, as part of this MassSave incentives for construction, a renovations and additions program that's out there too.
Okay. In terms of the opt-in code, that only applies to the new houses that are being built.
That's correct, yeah.
And that decision is a decision of the DOER, is that? What I'm wondering about, since our housing stock since our town is built out, could that potentially change in the future where it's applied to existing houses as well as new houses?
Well, the stretch code itself can apply to major renovations too. Mike, I don't know if you want to mention that at all as well.
Yeah, I can speak to that. So yeah, so the stretch code does have provisions that do apply to additions, alterations, repairs, and changes of use or occupancy. When a HERS rating is triggered really depends on the size of the project. So if it's under 1,000 square feet, it essentially has to comply with the code for any new portion added. So if if you're adding new walls, you just have to meet the prescriptive insulation requirements for the walls. But if it's over 1,000 square feet, those projects are subject to a HERS rating. For a major renovation or alteration over 1,000 square feet or over 100% of the existing floor area is being added to the home or adjusted. And with that change, the requirements for the HERS index for them are less stringent than they are for new construction. So instead of requiring a 42, which is the new construction value, it's a 65, 70, or 75, depending on if you're building all electric, mixed fuel, or adding a solar system to the project. So that's just some note about the existing projects. And again, this is all stuff in the stretch code, but not as much in the specialized code. One thing I want to note too is that there was a exception added to these requirements where if you're finishing a basement or attic space, but not altering the footprint of the roof line, those are also exempt from the HERS rating if it's over 1,000 square feet. So even if it's over 1,000 square feet and you're just finishing your basement by insulating at the foundation walls as opposed to the basement ceiling or the floor of the thing above, that change in itself wouldn't trigger HERS. It's just when you have a project that's over that size threshold.
The incentives that I saw on the slides, a number of those were based on federal tax credits.
Yep.
How sure are we that those are going to be there in the future, given the current administration?
Yeah, so we did note on those slides that they are expiring soon. So some of the funding for that initially came through the Inflation Reduction Act, and with the budget reconciliation bill that was passed, I think some of those incentives were cut and are going away. So on that slide, we did actually show when some of that stuff is expiring. But the mass save incentives are still there, and they will continue to be there in the future.
Last question, I promise.
Yeah, no worries.
I'm fascinated with batteries and the development of battery technology. I wonder if you can talk for a couple of minutes on how that applies to the different standards or how that can be incorporated.
Yeah, I'd be happy to describe that. At this point, it's really not incorporated into the code in any way. But in future versions of the model code that are coming in like a few years or something like that, they actually are, there's an appendix to the national model code for the newer version. And again, this is getting in the weeds of the code, so it's a little bit out there, but they do have readiness provisions for electric vehicle or on-site energy storage systems like that. So there's a code appendix in the next version of the code that's optional, but communities can choose to adopt it if they want to potentially install those those things in the future. And I believe in the commercial code, as part, I'd have to double check the requirements, but I know with a big commercial building, there is a space requirement for a future on-site energy storage system that I believe is included in that Solar Ready appendix. But I'd have to double check the specific code on that. Or Mark, if you want to verify, I think that would be helpful. But it's my understanding that as part of that Solar Ready requirement in the commercial code, that's, again, requirement of the stretch code, one of the pieces of that is just the space for a future or space for a future system. Yeah.
I have two questions. One
Sure.
is in the communities that have adopted the opt-in, are you hearing or seeing anything from them that it's put an increased workload on their electrical inspector and their building department to keep up with all of the inspections related to electrifying? I'm asking because we have a part-time electrical inspector, very, very part-time.
Yeah, I can let Mark speak to that, but I want to hear your response, and then I can add something in.
Yeah, that's a good question. I don't know anything specific about the electrical inspector. I know that, as I mentioned before, any changes in code often do place an additional burden on the building inspector to learn the new codes and understand them, and then as we roll them out, and that's why we try and help with the education part of it. Specifically the electrical inspector, I would have to ask around. I think all of it would be anecdotal, but I can certainly ask.
Thanks. And Mark, this is likely another question for you. How many Massachusetts communities have reached climate leader certification?
I should know that off the top of my head, but I think it's 19 is what we announced. So I think it's 19. But all of those that had to were the early adopters of climate leaders, or of the specialized stretch code, and they had, a lot of them had already had stuff in place. But I'll just verify that with you.
Thank you.
I had a question.
And speaking also just to your first question regarding like the building inspectors and their, like, what they experienced with the specialized code. Speaking from some experience of when I've worked with them, when they realize what's actually in the code, they actually tend to be a little bit more in favor of it because it's really not much that's being added. As I said, it's just that pre-wiring and that solar system. And I think once they realize it's only those two pieces, they tend to think it's a little bit more palatable because the stretch code has a lot in it and there's a lot of information to learn, a lot of information that they have to consider. Like, and that just, it does come with any new code update. So it's a 3-year cycle. So when a new code is adopted, there's a lot of information to learn for them. But because the specialized code really only adds like 1 or 2 or 3 things on top of what's already there, when building inspectors realize that, they tend to be less like against it, I would say, or are more understanding of it and supportive of it.
So, Lynn, yeah, it was 19, the Western Mass communities that became climate leaders are Amherst, Ashfield, East Hampton, and Pelham. If you wanna, I always recommended like learning from the other communities too. If we're interested in talking to nearby communities about the specialized code, I would look at the map of communities that have already adopted it. East Hampton, Northampton adopted the specialized code, Pelham, Amherst, Shutesbury, Ashfield, Stockbridge, and Warwick in Western Mass.
Thank you.
Yeah, for mixed fuel houses, new construction, is it possible that a design could purposely avoid solar? Or is that, would they not get a permit to actually build?
I mean, I think it's something where like I think because there's only very specific situations when those exceptions apply, and there's really when there's not a suitable solar zone. I mean, I don't really know what they could do to try to skirt the requirements. Like, are they going to add new, like, because they can't really add new trees that can like show that. They
Roofing gable designs, things like that.
Yeah, well, the big thing is the code actually, in the stretch code, does actually require solar readiness already. So what that means is that even when you're following the stretch code, not the specialized code, you have to make sure that there's adequate space on the roof to put a future solar system. You have to make sure that the roof load can accommodate the weight of a new system. You have to make sure that there's a pathway for potentially routing future conduit for a solar system. So, I mean, there are specific requirements in the code that really say, like, here's all the things you have to do to make this happen. So even if they want to skirt the, like, specific requirements, I mean, there are still solar ready requirements there. But I don't know what or how someone would go about trying that.
And the second question is, on new construction, is there a time limit between the time of use and the time of applying solar? So we're doing it in middle school. There is going to be a time frame between the use of the building and when solar is actually applied. So is that allowed in this code, or?
I believe so. So the way I like to describe it is that the code requirements are applicable based on the date of the permit application. So if their permit application is, so if you're adopting a specialized code in 1 month, or next year, 2026, and it's permitted for like December 2025, you're actually still subject to the requirements of the stretch code as opposed to the specialized code. It's based on permit date. As it pertains to when the solar is added to the project, I might defer to Mark on this, but I think my best guess is like before the final certificate of occupancy is issued, is when you have to have that installed. Mark, do you have any other guidance there?
I don't know. That's the first time I've been given that. I would have to ask, our codes team about that. So the question is, if you finish the school, but you're not ready to put the solar up until like a year later or something, but the building is occupiable, let's say.
That's the current plan, correct? Yes.
Okay. Yeah, I don't know. I would have to ask that question to get back to you.
Okay.
Yeah, that's a good question.
That doesn't apply to our school.
Are there any other
Okay.
questions?
Our school does not.
I want to
It's not
thank
based
you,
in-
and I thank you all for being part of this. But, oh, I'm sorry.
Sorry, I was just correcting or adding information. Sorry. The new,
Apologize.
the new middle school, it's not going to trigger that, if I'm understanding this right, the new middle school is not a mixed fuel.
Okay,
So
so,
it's all electric, so
yeah.
the solar is,
Is it though? I mean, it's geothermal.
I'm
heat
sorry,
pump,
it's
but-
geothermal, so it's not, it doesn't trigger your,
But any gas
So-
use for hot water heating and
don't believe it's
Cooking.
gas use. I'm not,
Okay.
Yeah, I would assume it's all electric even for the cooking and the hot water. I haven't seen the school, but it's being built nowadays.
Is it okay if the labs in the school like have gas supplied to it?
What's the burners?
Because I'm,
The
you
Bunsen
know,
burners, yeah.
Yeah,
I don't know if there's an exception for Bunsen burners. I thought about that too, but there are, I think, I've seen examples of electric
sure they have gas.
options for that as well, but I don't know what's being implemented.
Yeah, and I think because the Bunsen burners wouldn't necessarily trigger like space heating, water heating, cooking, or clothes drying, I don't think they'd be applicable in that sense there, so I would think, I mean, again, I'd have to check with the code and the specific things there, but that's sort of how I look at it, where it's like it wouldn't trigger that, so.
I remember there being a gas.
Gas fireplace does trigger the mixed fuel path.
I remember there being a gas generator, but you could be right, it could be 100% electric, I'm not positive.
Yeah, and the note on that is that even if you're building an all-electric project, there is an available option for a backup gas or diesel generator, and that doesn't deter you from being in the all-electric path. So even if you're using a backup fossil fuel generator, you're still considered all-electric for the purposes of this traffic specialist code.
I think there were some questions online.
Oh, sure, yeah, absolutely.
Can you raise your hand if you had a question online?
One here.
Oh,
Great.
They put them into the chat.
One more question.
Oh, sure, yeah, sorry, Chris.
What roadblocks did you see other towns have to go through to adopt this code, and how did they get through it?
I think community education's been something that's been really helpful, and especially like in terms of getting through it. Like we've done sessions like this for a lot of different communities across the state. A lot of the communities we've been at and done these types of educational sessions for, where community members can actually learn what's in it and be able to effectively communicate it to those around them. That's been really a big opportunity for growth in terms of like the availability of these requirements. So when it comes to like adoption, really the more you educate the community and the more you have like people spearheading the initiative in town, the better you are in terms of addressing the town meeting or city council or something like
Okay, thank you. Greg, do you want to read those?
that. Sure.
So the question is, with the specialized energy code, introducing stricter blower, door, and thermal bridge requirements, what role will the town building inspectors play in verifying compliance? Will it be limited to reviewing third-party reports or additional training and resources needed to critically access this occupation? Should town prepare for increased reliance on certified HERT graders and commission agents?
So yeah, that's a really great question. But as I've mentioned throughout the presentation, the requirements for HERS are actually the same under the stretch code and the specialized code. So because of that, there's no difference in those requirements. So the blower door requirements that are mentioned are the same between the stretch and the specialized, as well as the maximum allowed HERS score are the same between the stretch and the specialized. When it comes to that education piece, as I said, MassSave has been providing training to code officials for years now, helping with understanding some of the more challenging elements of energy code compliance. So we've been doing our best to get code officials in the room, monthly webinars. We provide tools that are available on the website as well to help aid code officials. One tool that we haven't actually put out yet, but is sort of in the process of being created, is actually a tool to help code officials understand HERS reports better. So what it is a outline of the typical HERS report and says this provision corresponds to this potential specific requirement of the code and things like that. So that's just an example of the kind of tool that that Mass Save does roll out on behalf of some of these folks to make sure they're educated on these requirements as they become available. But to the specific question, when it comes to the differences in standards between the blower door and things like that for this, they really are ultimately the same. As I said, the big differences are that pre-wiring and that solar requirement.
The second question was, since the specialized energy code applies mainly to new constructions, what should the town itself take to prevent two-tier system where new buildings achieve high performance but existing buildings don't, especially for municipal buildings and other older residential homes? Should we prepare incentive program retrofit road maps or phase requirements to bring older buildings in line?
So I guess the way I'd say that is, to me it doesn't, so the older buildings still are subject to energy rating requirements. So they are less stringent than new construction, as I mentioned, but they still have to get hit. So existing buildings still have like minimum efficiency thresholds they have to meet to get to those like HERS requirement targets that we talked about. So as I said,
If you're doing major renovations.
yeah, exactly.
But if the question implied that you're not doing major renovations, is there an incentive or some structure to help them move to the same standard?
So Mass Save, I mean, is probably that incentive right there. My house was built in 1900. I've taken advantage of Mass Save incentives for heat pumps, for weatherization, to try and bring it up. You know, I think the state is kind of leading that effort. I am a huge advocate of energy committees. I think that the volunteers that we have around the state do an amazing job of getting the word out to residents, and I know Andrea and her team have done a great job too of trying to bring that education into the community. So that's always an option too. So sometimes it's just that local education that needs some help. I saw in the question they asked specifically about municipal buildings as well. And yeah, that's part of the roadmap. You know, that's why part of becoming a climate leader is trying to identify those buildings, identify those opportunities, so that when that construction comes up, you're ready. You're ready for making the leap to getting rid of fossil fuels and trying to electrify. Because everybody's becoming cleaner.
I want to thank everybody for coming and for the great questions that you asked. I also want to thank Mark. I haven't seen you in a long time. It's been years, so thank you for participating. I didn't realize you were going to be here.
I think I met you once in person pre-COVID, and it's been all virtual.
Thank you also for presenting tonight. I think if there are additional questions, you can send them to us at the Energy and Sustainability Committee, and I think you can link to us on the website. So please do, and we'll be able to help answer them. Thank you.